All right. Sorry, I just was worried that I'm trying to use a different kind of technology here, and I was afraid I would spend all this time talking and then discover that it didn't record. So, okay, we're talking about cats and their blood transfusions. So, um, and incompatible blood transfusions, and so putting type type A blood um, into a type B cat is the worst, right? So if a cat has, is type B, that means they have allo antibodies to type A, and it'll really cause a really very violent, potentially deadly transfusion reaction. The cat with type B blood, all its antibodies are going to go crazy attacking the type A transfusion, and this could just cause DIC and all sorts of other kind of violent reactions, I guess. So, in other words, we don't want to put Prince's blood, my cat, or your cat, we don't want to put it into like a little Devon Rex that has type B. The opposite, if we took blood from a Devon Rex and we put it into Prince, in other words, if we put type B blood into a type A cat, there would still be a reaction. It would just be less severe. Prince's anti-B antibodies would just reduce the lifespan of those transfused type B red blood cells. So it wouldn't be such a violent reaction. It would mostly just reduce the effectiveness of the transfusion. And then just showing you, if a cat is type A, you can donate to another type A or to AB, and vice versa. Type B can go to AB or B, right? B cannot go to A cannot go to B. There's no donor, right? There is a recipient, universal recipient, but there's no universal donor like we had in dogs. We can kind of get the DEA4 dog, but there's nothing like that in cats. So all cats really should be blood typed and be cross matched, and I'll talk about cross matching. And again, some of you, if you want to bring your cats, I'll send out a little sign up sheet. If a few people could bring their cats on Wednesday, we'll test them to see if they're A or B. And then cats also have another antigen called MIK. There's no test for that, so that's a little bit like I think the Rh factor in humans. It makes you either O positive or O negative or AB positive or AB negative. I think of this as being kind of like that. There's no test for it. Only a cross match would detect it. And again, I'll just tell you, a cross match is where we take the donor's blood and the recipient's blood, and we're gonna mix them in a special way to see if they clump. So that's what a cross match means. It means you're taking the donor blood and the recipient blood, and you're going to do this sort of procedure to see if there's any reaction. There's more to it than that. You're not just mixing two types of blood together. I wish it were that simple, but we'll talk about that more on Wednesday and a little bit more today. Okay, cows and horses, because they're so much more complicated, it means the solution is a bit more simple. Cows, there's just so many different antigens. There's no allo antibodies, but the most, but they'll make antibodies if depending on the blood transfusion. There is one antigen called J, but in general, if we had to give a cow or a calf, whatever, or a goat or a sheep, I guess, but primarily cows, if we had to give them a blood transfusion, we would just cross match. We would take the sick cow and a potential donor cow, and we would do this procedure. It takes a little time, but it can be done, pretty quickly. And then, like cows, horses also have this vast number of antigens. The red blood cells of the ideal donor horse would be negative for AA and QA. So they're kind of like the 1.1 and the 1.2 of the horse world. AA and QA are the most immunogenic. And there may be, I suspect with horses, there probably are some, there could be some blood products that you could purchase. Same breeds of horses likely to be more compatible, so we would use a Percheron to donate to a Percheron and so on. And also, like dogs, thank goodness, horses are not born with alloantibodies. So a first transfusion should be safe, but I say should. Again, that depends on how you define safe. And we're going to watch a little video next week. This is a good moment to bring up this condition. This is not really a blood transfusion problem. This is a neonatal problem, but it may help you appreciate what I mean by safe. Your patients could have a history that we don't know about. We may think, we may give a dog a transfusion thinking, well, the first transfusion is safe. Well, maybe the dog got a transfusion. Maybe the owner rescued the dog from an animal shelter. Maybe the dog got a transfusion years earlier. We don't. The dog doesn't tell us, oh, by the way, this is my second transfusion. And there's another thing that can happen with horses that I'll explain. So, a condition that we see not just in foals, but that seems to be the most well known. So just as a review, right, when a foal is born, they're going to drink colostrum, and colostrum is that first milk. It's very rich in antibodies, and for the first 12 hours, 24 hours, that foal's stomach will allow those antibodies in the colostrum to pass through into the foal's bloodstream, and we call that passive transfer. It's important in all of us, but especially in horses and ruminants, because that's mainly, there's something about their placenta where the maternal antibodies just don't get across. So foals and cows and goats and sheep, etc., they really have very few antibodies when they're born. They really depend on colostrum for that, for their antibodies. But now, what if the antibodies in the colostrum, what if the mare's, antibodies, what if the mare has antibodies that are going to attack the foal's red blood cells? Remember, you could have a different blood type than your mother, right? A foal could have a different blood type than its mother. And so what if that colostrum is deadly? What if that colostrum contains, it'd be like if you're type A and your mom's colostrum has anti-A antibodies. The same thing could happen to you. And we call this condition neonatal isoerythrolysis. Iso means same. Erythrolysis means destruction of red blood cells. So that's what's happening. Now, again, just showing you, right, foal drinking the colostrum, there's the little foal's red blood cells, and now there's antibodies from the mare attaching, and that's going to cause agglutination and or hemolysis. So far, so good? Now you may be asking, well, why would that happen? Why would a mare have antibodies against her own foal's blood group? Well, she would have to have been exposed to this different blood group. How would that happen? Well, maybe she had a foaling before and it was difficult. So maybe the foal, imagine 2 years earlier, a difficult foaling. The foal could have blood coming from its umbilicus. Not a lot of blood, but just a little bit of blood, maybe mixing with the blood in her uterus or her cervix. So right, it's a difficult foaling. She's bleeding. The foal is bleeding. Maybe everybody's okay, but now she's been exposed to this weird foal blood, and she's going to make antibodies to it. She's fine, But now she's got these antibodies in her body that are going to end up in her colostrum 2 years from now. Or who knows, maybe she had a blood transfusion with that same blood group. So there are ways where her blood could have intermingled with this other blood type. Um, um, and that's why sometimes they will do antibody screens on mares to check for any anti-red blood cell antibodies to the foal, right, just to be safe. And if it turns out like, oh my gosh, she has antibodies, she has these various antibodies to these different red blood cells, then we just don't let the foal nurse. They make these little kind of basket muzzles for the foal so he can be with her, but he just can't nurse on her, and they'll just, they'll just bottle feed him or have a brood, I don't know. Anyway, they just won't let him nurse off her. All right. And again, we'll talk about this a little more. Again, how do we select a donor? There's different ways, right? You can do blood typing. This is what we'll do in class. We'll check to see if your dog is, when it says DEA1, what it means is 1.1. And so we'll test your dog to see if your dog is 1.1 negative or 1.1 positive. That's all we're going to test for. Cross-matching, I mentioned, is where we take the blood from the donor and the blood from the recipient, the sick patient, and we do what's called a major and a minor cross-match. The major cross-match is we're trying to see if there's any reaction between the donors, right? Here's the donor, the healthy dog. We're trying to see if there's any reaction between their red blood cells and the donor's plasma, right? I'm sorry, the recipient's plasma, right? Does the recipient have antibodies that are going to attack the red blood cell? Now, there's also something called a minor cross-match, because remember, we're not just giving red blood cells, we're also, the donor is also donating plasma. So the donor might have antibodies to the recipient's red blood cells. That's not as big a problem. And we call that the minor cross-match. So I think ideally we would not have agglutination with either. I think we can allow a little bit of agglutination in this, what's called a minor cross-match. But again, it's all about antibodies and the red blood cell. Again, just showing you, there's the donor. So there's his plasma, it's got antibodies, and there's the red blood cells, it has some antigens, and so we basically we're gonna combine the donor's red blood cells with the recipient's plasma to see if there's antibodies here that react with the red blood cells, and we're also going to see if there's antibodies here that are going to react with with the patient's red blood cells. Anyway, that's what we'll be doing in class on Wednesday. And you'll also meet Ralph. He's not very bright, but we'll see if he's a good donor for Rocco. All right, if you have any questions, you know where to find me, office hours, or send me an email or give me a call. All right, take care, everyone.